Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this public program, Artist Talk, Shirley Tse. My name is Joshua Oduga, and I am the Exhibitions and Public Programs Manager at Art in Practice. I'm very excited to welcome you all to this program, which is pre-recorded. Today, I welcome Shirley Tse, an artist working in a various of mediums, including sculpture. Shirley's work is work that I first encountered in my travels as I was traveling to the Venice Biennale. And I'm very excited to welcome her here today to talk a little bit about that work, but really dive into her entire practice in a whole. Shirley, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Joshua. Thank you so much for having the opportunity to share my work on the AMP practice, Art in Practice platform.
Yeah, we're very excited to have you. I'm very excited over the various conversations that we've been having kind of leading up to this conversation to share some of the ideas that we've talked about over time, things that are very much ingrained in your practice. So I think we're gonna start off with the little presentation that you have to share with us.
Yes, I'm gonna start, I'm gonna go to share screen now. Do you see it?
Yeah, looks great.
Awesome. So the slide is organized that I'm going to focus on the Venice Biennale project, which is actually two exhibitions. The first one is in Venice, which you see it here, and it's called Stakeholders. And the second one, which is actually the return show or the homecoming show, took place in Hong Kong in 2020, and this, the title of that exhibition is called Stake and Holder. And in between these two exhibitions, I'm going to show three bodies of older work that directly influence this project. Right. And I'm going to go to this next slide, which is a video documentation of the Venice portion. Okay. I thought the video get you a sense of how to navigate the space in the installation, and also because there's a sound element of the radio, so that you get to hear some of the sample. And well, the show is called Stakeholders, and I chose that title because it's actually have double meaning. And morphologically, there's a lot of stake and holder form in the exhibition. You know, it's like really elongated thing, and then, you know, device the whole thing. So it's stake and holders. And then, of course, philosophically, it talks about the concept of stakeholders, which is, to me, is an alternative to the binary opposition of individual versus collectivity. Yeah. I often find that, you know, this binary between individual on one hand, or like, you know, the collective is really limited. So, and stakeholder talk about holding stick together, which does have that collectivity. But they also talk about the interdependence and doing non-competitive work. And then at the same time, it also emphasized the individual, you know, which is taking ownership, having agency. So that, to me, really speak to the form of togetherness that I want to talk about.
Yeah,
and
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just jump in really quickly and give a little bit of an anecdote from when I experienced the work.
Please.
The way that it made me think about my own physical presence and things of that nature before I even really took a second to think about the title and all the different connotations that you just very beautifully laid out for everyone tuning in. But I think that that's one of the things that's really great about seeing it in a video. And I really loved that video. It really took me back to that experience of experiencing the work. And we talked a little bit about this when we first started talking to each other, this idea about where you're experiencing a work and how you're experiencing it is so important. And I think that for me, that's something that I connect with a ton in your work. And I think as we go through this talk, everyone that's tuning in will see other elements of that as well. But go ahead.
Thank you. I'm so glad. Yeah, you are one of the very few people from LA who have, you know, seen the show in person. So that's great. And the slide you're seeing right now is there's actually two installations in the show. So there's an outdoor portion and then there's an indoor portion. And Joshua, if you remember, I don't know if you get a chance to sit on that bleacher and enjoy the piece. And the outdoor piece is called Play Court. And it's, as you can see, you know, also from the video as well. So it's sort of like an imaginary game of street badminton. And I laid out, instead of a net in the middle of the court, I lay out a set of sculpture on stand. So to me, they kind of act like this optical net. And then on both sides, there are badminton racket. Maybe in the video, you might catch details of the brand name of the badminton I chose very specifically. One is called Victoria, which is the old name for Hong Kong when it was a British colony. And then the other one is Imperial. So also, you know, referencing the history, the colonial history of Hong Kong for this special occasion where I represent Hong Kong. And the choice of badminton also refer to, because, you know, actually badminton was invented in colonial India, and then it became really popular in Asia. So it's sort of like a mixture between a very old form of a kind of like, what do you call it? Shuttlecock, using a shuttlecock, and then combine that with a racket. So, and because the theme is about stakeholders, so I wanted to address the idea about public domain. So playing street badminton is a way to reclaim public space. You know, you take up some public space and you start to play a game, which is it could be improvisational and non-predetermined. So I also included amateur radio in Play Court, and it's another example of claiming public domain, which is not physical space, but the airwave, which is our public space. And amateur radio is still being used today, and although the frequency that's allowed for civilian use is very limited, because a lot of them have been taken up by government and commercial purpose. So, and it's a form that still allow person-to-person connection without the mediation of government or technology firm platform. Is unlike internet. You don't need, you know, a server to communicate with each other. So I really like that idea of this sort of, you know, unmediated connection between individual. And I'll talk more about the sculpture in the middle in a second. And so we'll get into more detail of that. And so in the indoor piece, it's another installation that actually take up 3 different rooms. So as you enter into the space, I don't know if you remember, Joshua, when you enter the space, you know, you actually cannot go through the piece because the work actually blocked that archway. So you have to, you know, back out from the entrance and go from another entrance sort of to your left to see the piece from the other side. So that is on purpose. It's always, the way that I construct my installation, I usually conceive them as a sort of sculptural installation. There's always an element of responding to the site. So it's sort of site responsive. And I really want to play with the architecture of the space. And the title of this piece called Negotiated Difference. So in a way, there's many ways in which you can understand negotiation, and negotiating with the space or the architecturally is definitely one of them. And what you see here, I just want to describe the material a little bit, is made of carved wood spindle, and all the wood spindle is actually done by hand on a lathe. You know, I turn this wood on the lathe, and it's really a laborious process. And they are connected together with 3D printed joint. And the filament that I use in the 3D printers are wood, metal, and plastic. So there's also a variety of 3D printed material as well. And I'm combining old and new technology in that sense, and also putting together subtractive and additive form. You know, the carving is taking away material, so it's subtractive. The 3D printing is adding material in layers, so it's additive in terms of, you know, sculptural languages. And there's no fixed configuration of how it should be connected in terms of an installation. It's sort of like a game and non-program, although there are sections, there are clusters that I might have pre-planned ahead of time. But then the whole installation, they're all connected as one body. There's no separation. So we'll put certain clusters that's pre-planned, and then, you know, during the installation, then we'll figure out how to connect these clusters. So that is, you know, that is the fun part, but also very tricky because there's no glue or nails involved. It's all done by balancing the weight and angle, because the idea is about how differences come together to join the fight against gravity, so to speak. And they have to do it through negotiation.
I love that idea, and I love how multi-layered all of this is, especially as we get to later parts of this presentation and you start to talk about the second iteration of this exhibition and how that came to fruition and all of the actual logistics of doing it, which are really interesting, I think, for people tuning into this program. But I think it is really important to talk about the difference in materials and all of these different techniques that you're using. And then a little bit how the element of chance plays into all of this as well. I love how you were saying that the things are not connected in a way, and it's all up to gravity and essentially the team of people that come together to install it with yourself and all of that. And I think that that is something that comes across by looking at the work, even in photographs as well. So it's really interesting to hear you talk more about that. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, because, you know, I try to bring all the different kind of differences together, because, you know, I think we counted over 40 different species of wood, and there's no stained or paint involved, so it's all the natural color of the wood species, and the color is different, and then in the form we use are also very different. Some of them representational, a lot of them are representational, but there are quite a number of them also abstract. And then there is object that we copy from, like, you know, table legs or balusters that are functional, that are architectural, but then some of them are like domestic object, or, you know, there's object from the kitchen, but then there's also sport object. So there's an indoor and outdoor going on. And then there's musical instrument. And then there's also, you know, in my research of trying to figure out what kind of object ever be made on a lathe. You know, I also went through different culture, you know, like it's a really old technology that was used in northern Africa, and actually I traveled to Morocco to study some of it. Oh, and wow. So I was in Asia. So you will see there's a combination of different kind of differences. And I cannot emphasize enough that, you know, the individual element is very different to each other. That is a really important concept, because I believe that we all hold an even stick, you know. Some, you know, as a metaphor, some of us hold more weight than others. So that is kind of like the concept of bringing it all together.
Yeah, definitely.
And I want to say that, like, back to the concept stakeholder, when I was making the work, I know of this term, and also in my teaching, I actually use this term a lot, but I have to be honest with you, I never really studied the origin of the terms until after I make the work. And then, you know, I'm teaching at CalArts, and then I thought, you know, I should teach a class called Stakeholders, which will give me an opportunity to do more research on the concept, and it actually comes from management theory, and it's really fascinating. And I also want to say that, you know, sometimes I read theory to be inspired to make work, but sometimes it's the other way around. I will make the work first, and then there's a concept that becomes really interesting and important, then I'll go back and do more research. So it's sort of like a back and forth movement, and that's important to me as well.
And I think that that's such an important element of this idea that you talk about in terms of collectivity and things of that nature, right? Like, I talk to so many artists that are research-based and things like that. And more often than not, it does start with the research first. But I always wonder myself, as a person that works in support of artists, what about the work that you're making, and kind of, you know, the various different rabbit holes that can take you down once you create a work and you realize that. And I love this idea of having a whole class that you then taught about that, because I'm sure, you know, so many different ideas came from your student base, especially at a place like CalArts, in terms of what the term stakeholder actually means. Because for me, it brings up all of these like business and financial connotations when I think of it. And that's very much built into my own personal experience. You know what I mean?
But Joshua, it's actually much more than that. You know, when it was first written, I guess actually Edward Freeman was not the first one who brought this concept along, but he was the one who kind of summarized it. And actually the main point for him is not just limited to business. You know, it's very important to him. It's actually, you know, come to think of it, you know, published in 1984, is actually quite radical. For him to think that there is actually no difference between with things that is within economic or outside economic. So, because the simplest definition is a stakeholder is any group or individual who can affect or is affected by the achievement of a corporation purpose. You know, so whoever or whatever unit entity that can affect the health of a organization or whatnot. And that is, including both inside and outside, and both entity that serve economic or business or financial purpose, but also the non one, including social, environmental, interest group and whatnot, So I think that is a really radical concept, actually, that they make no differences between, there's not allowing economic to dominate over the other realm. And then also I really like that he talked about when there is a conflict, he does not, under the stakeholder theory, it's not considered as conflict it's not considered conflict as much, but it's more considered as an opportunity to review the whole thing all together, so that maybe new opportunity can come up, new value creation can come up. So it's a very holistic approach to look at something, which I quite like. And
I think that's so radical for the time, definitely. And it makes me think about this time that we're living in, and this idea of like mutual aid. It's something that kept coming up a lot in the past year with the various different social upheavals and things that are happening all over the world. And I think looking at it from this lens is something that's really interesting. And, applying art to that is kind of the way I think that people can really get a hold of an idea like this. So I love that you're exploring this in your art and in your teaching as well.
Thank you. I think you brought up, the time we live in, indeed, because I think the concept of stakeholder is really important, all the more important when in society where people are disenfranchised.
Yeah.
Being disenfranchised, they don't bear the title of shareholder, which is not stakeholder, shareholder, voters, or homeowners. Maybe they can be called consumer or taxpayer. So stakeholder is a default term to remind those in power that these people matter. And at the same time, it's a term to empower everyone. So I think that point is really important. And I remember when the press asked me to give example, what you mean by stakeholder, I always have, this is back in 2018 before the biennial. And I was trying to come up with an analogy and metaphor to explain the concept of stakeholders. But ever since COVID hit the world, it needs very little explanation. It's so painfully clear to everyone that we are all at stake, and our action and inaction has an effect on others way down the line, even though that they may not be obvious to us in the first place. So we live in a world of strong second and third order effect.
And to take it back to your work just really quickly, that's such a delicate process, which is something I've been thinking about a lot. The way that this work is put together and what you're saying about how it's joined and things like that. And even some of the references, like, thinking about actual sculptural and architectural forms that you're using, or furniture and things like that. It's so multi-layered and it's so much to unpack. Go ahead.
Yeah, indeed. So back to the negotiated difference, I want to say that the theme of the biennial was May You Live in Interesting Times. And it opened in May of 2019. And I will be amiss if I don't mention the protests that broke out in Hong Kong that actually still lasts today, but it's been kind of quiet down a little bit. And so it opened in May, and then the protests broke out in Hong Kong in June of 2019. And I want to say that it created huge resonance for people who came visit the biennial from Hong Kong. And, I cannot claim to be as, to have the, to foresee that happen, because the work actually was more of a product of the world in general than for Hong Kong in particular. Because back in 2018, when I was making the work, I was really talking about the rise of nationalism, fascism, populism, and also a young generation lacking the ability to connect to people who are very different from them. I suppose it might be something to do with the echo chamber effect that created by social media. And there's widespread divisiveness everywhere. And that is, is under those contexts that negotiated difference was born. And then I also want to mention that I was the first female artist to represent Hong Kong in a solo show. So at the opening of for the show, I dedicated my exhibition to a women sculptor and educator in the world. It is a commitment to these two roles that keep me going in times of difficulty, and still is. And I also pay tribute to immigrant caretakers, student activists, and mental health patients. And these are the disenfranchised people particularly need the recognition of them as stakeholders. And women sculptor and educator describe who I am today, and immigrant caretakers, student activists, and mental health patient were the path that I went through to become who I am today. And then, this is, I mentioned when you walk into one room, you're kind of blocked by the work, and then you have to come out and then enter from the other room. So this is actually what you will see from the other room. It's more sparse. And this is one example in which we can see how the differences come together. For example, you can see that here we got a cue stick connected to a baseball bat, connected to like a flower rolling pin. And then there's some abstract element here. And then this is like a prosthetic leg. So this is sort of my vision of bringing all the differences together. And here is a section that, oh, I just skipped one. Here's a section that has more color to it. And this section is a little bit more abstract and have more of the furniture element to it. And then you can see that there's actually also different scale. They're not, some of them are on a smaller scale than other.
Yeah, I love the juxtaposition in both. You'll see something that appears in one part of the image, and you'll see it in a totally different scale, and sometimes a totally different color and all of that. So it really tasks the viewer with trying to negotiate those differences, I guess I will say. And it's a really fun game to play when you're viewing the work. And I viewed it alone, but I wonder how my experience would have been if I had been with other individuals. And that's a really fun thing to think about as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So, it was done over a year and a half. I had like a kind of mental checklist of, what kind of differences I want to include in the show. So, and then there's also at some point it become a kind of visual diary. Things happen, and then they become part of the work. For example, this section is a gavel, and I'm talking about around November 2018. The Democrat won back the House, so to speak, and then we got Nancy Pelosi holding the gavel, and then like when you making certain thing, you're so sensitive with things. So when I saw the gavel that she was holding, I was like, oh, that's made of wood, and it looks like it could be turned on a lathe. And then the next thing I know, I went to my sister, I got to turn a gavel, and that's how this thing is born. But the thing is now, when you look at a gavel, it has a handle and a body, and then you're supposed to drill a hole into the body where you can insert the handle. But that is not the logic of negotiated differences. The wood actually do not connect to wood directly. It has to be mediated through the negotiation of the 3D print joint. So, and then you see this portion of the installation is actually was constructed in a way so that these two elements can be visually aligned, even though they're actually not touching, but they are visually aligned. So it kind of create a kind of visual illusion of the connection. And I think that is another way, this actually speaks to my sculptural language of often have an element of suspending subjectivity in a way, so that, you know, I think that visual invention come along when you're not entirely dependent on your own taste or you know, preferences, so to speak. So you allow other things to come along to negotiate with it, to have a convergence of it. So for example, again, you know, this whole configuration, well, you're only seeing the details, but this whole configuration, you know, no one planned to make it look good, so to speak, but we're trying to find a way for this thing to line up. So it's kind of fun to play that game.
Yeah, and that image of Nancy Pelosi is such an iconic image. I remember like the day that it happened and people sending it around. It was such a hilarious like moment, I think, in our history. And I think it's really important to talk about this idea in your work of, you know, changing the form and having something look a way that is a little bit off from how you may perceive it. Because I think that once again goes back to this idea of stakeholders and, you know, all the various different elements and the people who are coming together to do something. We all perceive things in a various different way as well. So I love that you put that in there. And also that these elements outside of your studio practice and like these pop cultural references, if you will, also make their way into the work. I think that that's really fun.
Yeah, thank you. And this image shows you that from this room connecting to the other room, there is a hockey stick here. And, you know, to go along with the story of how it become a kind of visual diary of the process, one day around that time, also winter of 2018, I was watching TV and I saw that the Winter Olympic, for the first time, we have a united Korean team of women ice hockey. And I thought, you know, what a powerful image, you know, and the next thing I know is I need to make a hockey stick. And actually that was not quite all turned on a lathe, because the hockey stick have area that is more angular. So we have to do it with hand, you know, carved by hand. And I mentioned we because I'm not the only one who do the carving. My wonderful assistant, Jin Choi, a former student from CalArts, done a lot of the carving also. And so, you know, it is definitely collaboration in so many different ways.
That's great.
And then this is the section of, you know, that is the cluster that I mentioned earlier. So this is the Moroccan cluster, because this section actually references Moroccan architecture. And it has a certain kind of element that need to line up. Again, this is another example to show you, in order for this particular element to line up together, we have to construct this whole section to make the visual overlap. And so that is part of the element of that improvisation.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well. I was thinking a second ago when you mentioned about, you know, a piece of wood can't connect to another piece of wood, and these kind of rules, if you will, that you have in the forms that you're making. I would imagine that it would be next to impossible to manage something like that on your own, even with the technology that we have at our disposal nowadays. And I think that's really interesting because you have so many different types of forms and references that are all coming together to make what you're making. But then in that, you also have a set of rules or a set of things that as an artist you would like to adhere to. I think that that's really interesting. Don't really have anything else other than that, but I just think that it means a lot, I think, when an artist is approaching work in that manner.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, so that rule is, in my mind, that is how I trying to bring different kind of subjectivity together. You know, the rule is in a way is a kind of subjectivity. In addition to, you know, the choice of certain function or choice of certain look, and of course, you know, the concept of the whole installation that require certain kind of flow and form as well. And then I want to talk a little bit about the 3D printed as well. So so the 3D file actually was downloaded from the internet from file that has a Creative Commons license that is you're free to use. And in my mind, this file that's available on the internet are the 21st century ready-made when you come to think of it. You know, all this file exists on the internet. You know, it's free for you to download and use it. But you know, in a way, the 3D printer is a way to actualize all this ready-made. You know, and it's like digital ready-made that is being actualized by the machine. So that's kind of how I see it. And I didn't know how to use a 3D printer at all. But you know, because of the installation and the concept required it, and I taught myself within that 2 or 3 years how to download file, you know, use the software and then print it. And then also I'm using a material that's actually considered as more sophisticated than plastic, because it's a composite of wood dust and, you know, metal dust. And so the failure rate was very high. And you can see that actually one day I just trying to print this connector. I don't know what happened. It shifted. So this top part's supposed to be right here, but you know, I checked the news the next day. I mean, sometimes it takes like 16 hours to print just one thing. So I would, you know, set the machine and, you know, went to bed, and then I wake up in the morning, I see this, it's like, oh my God, you know, did we have an earthquake that night? But there was no earthquake. But there was some error that the machine had thrown at me. But then I really liked the way that it still worked, you know? So it's just leaving the hanging part suspended. And you really see the process of how this is built by layers. So in a way, I see that the machine is also trying to be the artist. So this is kind of, you know, responding to what you see, that all these different ways of making coming together. So it's not just my you know, my taste and the rules, but also the machine also is, you know, become part of the artist.
Yeah. I've spent a bunch of time online looking at all of those open source files and things like that you can 3D print. And I think it's really interesting because those things are meant to be as close and as realistic as possible, right? Like when people are putting out those 3D prints that you download for free on the internet. And I love this idea of the error, because I'm sure so much error happens when you're 3D printing things and you're trying out these new kind of skills. The machine's hand as well, you know, being a part of it. I think about that a lot when I deal with artists who work in digital means and things of that nature. And only recently have I seen sculptors really start to talk about this idea. There's only yourself and like a few other artists who are like, something is 3D printed and it didn't turn out how, you know, the design is meant to be, but this is also a part of the work. And for you, that's so important, once again, talking about the themes that you're trying to hit on. But also it's just a really interesting thing to look at in terms of the work itself, because it's very obvious that some things are carved by a human hand and things like that, and you can see that. So then to be able to see the technology and how the technology shreds this fiber there or something of that nature, that's just a really great thing to see. And I think for a lot of like younger people and younger artists who are experiencing this art, that's a really great thing for them to be exposed to also.
Thank you. Now I want to go to an older work that has direct influence to negotiated difference. In a way, I see that negotiated difference is a sequel to this piece that was made back in 2000. That's like 20 years apart. And it's called Polymathic Styrene. And Polymathic Styrene is a made-up word. You see, I like to play with my title. So I'm combining polystyrene, which is styrofoam, and also polymath. A polymath is a kind of a Renaissance person, you know, someone who have encyclopedic knowledge. So in a way, very much like negotiated differences, this piece, I'm gonna quickly go through these images because in the interest of time. You can see that also in this piece, I'm trying to bring different, also this is the blocking that I'm talking about. Even prior to negotiated difference, I was, playing with, the sort of architectural intervention. So I blocked the passageway between the big room and the smaller room with this piece, and that was in there. And this is actually a different installation of the same piece in Brazil. So you can see that's also with the modular nature of this installation, it could be reconfigured in different space. And it's made of, I don't remember, like maybe 36 to about 40 panel of different length, different, width and thickness. And also you can see that, again, I'm trying to also bring different kind of differences together. In this piece, there are area that's very abstract. It's done by using a handheld router, also using a machine that carved on styrofoam. In a way, I see that as a kind of 3D drawing on styrofoam.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, this predates 3D printing by maybe at least 10 years, if my timeline is correct, in terms of like it being something that would be accessible to an artist in their studio maybe, but this is really interesting.
Yeah, I think it did predate 3D printing, but then at that time, actually, some people thought that it was done by a CNC machine, know.
That's gonna be my next question.
And a kind of computer control router, but it's not. It's made by, mostly made by hand using, like I said, with a handheld router. So I use a lot of jig to make this form. And in a way, because a router is a pretty specialized tool to use on wood. You really need to know, what to do with it. Otherwise, you can hurt yourself. You kind of have to work with the grain. But with styrofoam, you don't have to worry about the grain so much because there's no grain. There's not. Well, in woodworking term, there's something called a feed. Mm-hmm. You don't have to worry about the direction of the feed because the styrofoam is so yielding. So in a way, in my mind, I conceive this work as sort of me messing with the fodder tools. So I don't have to conform to going in one direction. I can go back and forth and make round and circles, So yeah, that was polymathic styrene. And like I said, there is some area that is more abstract and some more representational. And this panel's made after a visit to Legoland, for example. Some are very Baroque, some are kind of modernist. And from the same panel, you can, depends on, because it's installed in a circle, so you can read from left to right or right to left. And from this panel, you can read it as going from order to chaos or chaos to order, depends on which direction you're going. And this panel is sort of like a key or the legend. So it show you the collection of all the form of routed, the different shape of routed bit I used to carve the styrofoam. So there's no mystery to the making of the work. That's another really important language in my sculpture, is that I leave no mystery. So you know exactly how it's made. And also, I'm talking about using my hand to make drawing 3-dimensionally, but it's not just my hand, it's mediated by this manufactured item. This manufactured item has very standardized sizes. So I really like the sort of like suspending my own singular subjectivity and allow the machine, the ready-made and the manufactured form to negotiate with my hand at the same time to produce this form. So that part's also really important.
Yeah, I love this. I love this idea of you showing like how it's made in a way. And I think it's one of those things where I always think about certain artists and how their work require so much time. Like, you know, you can see someone's work in passing, or you can encounter a work for a short amount of time, but with some artists, you really need to spend time with the physical work itself. And I think you are making a really strong case for that in a lot of the work that you're making. Because like you said, there isn't a lot of mystery. Like if you look at that negotiated differences work and you spend some time with it, you can start to trace the elements. You will see the bowling pins and the baseball bats and all of these things. And the same thing here, like there's references to me that are very futuristic in what you're doing in this piece, but then I can see like some Baroque things and all of these other various elements that come out in the work. It just means you got to spend some time with it, I think, which is always an exciting thing for a person like myself who works in this field. It's like, how do we get people to really be in the space and look at the work and engage with it critically? And you're making a really good case for that.
Thank you, Joshua. You brought up something that is actually really important to both of these work, because I think it's really important to, in both of this work, I try to make the work so that you have to experience it through time. It's durational. So your experience of the work is, the work cannot be consumed by one single gaze. You cannot just look at it and you can't. You have to use your body and walk through the space and use a memory to composite the whole installation in your mind in order to have the full experience. So in a way, it's very cinematic. So, and I'm so glad that you brought this up. That's a really important point of the work as well. And then while this piece, Polymathic Styrene, is about bringing differences together, and even and you can actually see it visually too. So the kind of differences that I bring together is artificially put on one single plane. You know, they sort of kind of lay, the differences is laid out side by side. So unlike negotiated differences with the wood spindle, you know, I don't know, this getting into a little bit of a metaphor. So they don't have to work together, they just sit next to each other. So in a way, that's how I see negotiated difference as a sequel to this piece, because in negotiated difference, I really want to make something so that the differences have to work with each other. They don't just simply show up and sit next to each other. They have to work and balance and make something work. So, and I really want to emphasize that negotiated differences is not negotiation of differences. Negotiate difference is a qualifying word. So it's a way of qualifying differences as immanent. It's not transcendental. It's differences understood and experienced through negotiation. And it's not differences in the sense that a third party, a metaphysical being, or like an omniscient narrator deem these two things different. The individual entity of each spindle, so to speak, understand and experience how singular itself through the interaction and action with each other. So it's not waiting for someone else to define itself. It's self-defining, showing agency. The kind of differences is multiplicious, and since each negotiation is different and hence producing differences at every turn. So maybe I should flash back an image of that, since I'm actually talking about.
While you do that, I think that the way that you're explaining this, I think is really important. It really is important to go back and think about it in that manner, and think about how much language means to the work that you're doing. In a very important way. And then I think different people's perception of the language, because once again, I'll go back to this idea of negotiated differences, or what you were just saying. I could see myself coming to experience this work with someone and us having a little bit of a discussion about what we perceive and what we think about it. And I think that this is a very logical progression. I can definitely see how this earlier work led to what you were saying, and also how it would conjure up so many thoughts in your mind as an artist and as a person that's working you know, I think you mentioned that you worked in mental health care as well, or something like that. I can imagine how all of these experiences will inform your idea of these differences, and then trying to figure it out and applying it to your work in the next phase. I think I can see how all the wood and all of these other different references start to come together.
Thank you. Yeah, because you know, when you understand the difference through the thing next to you rather than being told why are these two things different, then it's not about a kind of putting things in the category of a label. It's through action, it's through negotiation, and it's definitely not, you know, this is a way to avoid being tokenized, I think. So and as if differences in some sort of natural law. So when you do that, it's really easy for it to become, to reinforce the sort of already constituted, and in our time tends to serve power. So that's just my way of trying to emphasize the agency of each entity. And in the interest of time, I think we should move forward to to play court. See, this is an angle to show you the scene of the street badminton, and then I wanted to really talk about this piece. It does have a shuttlecock in play court, which is titled Shuttle Pod, because the shuttlecock, which is a slightly bigger size than a shuttlecock, is made of rubber, cast rubber, and vanilla bean pod, and the title is under Quantum Shirley series, which I will talk about a little later. And very quickly, my family, it referred to my personal family history, and my mom's family, my mother's family, have contributed to the labor force in the rubber plantation in Malaysia, and her cousin's family contribute to the vanilla bean plantation in Tahiti, which belongs to the French. So, and when I started Quantum Shirley series back in 2009, I've made a number of different sculpture installations. But at that time, I was really hoping to come up with a sculpture that I will combine vanilla and rubber, but it took 10 years again for me to find a way to combine rubber and vanilla, and then, you know, in this form, and then they end up manifest in the form of shuttlecock or birdie, which I'm very pleased, because the way that you imagine a shuttlecock going back and forth in a court, it's just like the trade route of this colonial product, you know, on the map, so to speak. So I really like this sort of evocative images of this thing going back and forth, this sort of trade movement. And here's a little bit of a close-up, and I'm gonna go a little quicker in the slide because we will return to some of these objects or sculpture that I'll talk about. And there's a lot of references to movement as well. Like even I use the motorcycle helmet here to suggest a sense of movement. And since, you know, the sculpture is pretending to be the net of a badminton game, so I also put some netting on top of this helmet. And so this is the close-up of the Imperial, if you didn't catch it in the video. And then that's the Victoria. And now, so actually there are, I can't remember, I think there's 14 sculpture involved in play court. And actually 4 of the sculpture came from another show that I did, you know, in 2016. It's called Lift Me Up So I Can See Better. It was installed at the Shoshana Wing Gallery in LA. And this show, I'm gonna show you some So you can see there is the return of the bleacher in the Venice project. And here's another image. So this show, it's called Lift Me Up So I Can See Better. It's actually inspired by Oscar Wilde book called The Happy Prince and Other Tales. Not the Little Prince, not the French one, but The Happy Prince written by Oscar Wilde. And very quickly is an allegory about a prince. You know, it's a story, it's not real, right? So a prince, when he was alive, he danced all day inside the castle. So he couldn't really see the mystery and the poverty of his townspeople. So after he died, the people tried to commemorate him and make him into a statue, and with, you know, garnished with ruby eyes, and then you know, because it's a statue so high up on a tall column, and finally he was able to see the poverty and the misery of his town people. So he asked a bird, a swallow actually, to pluck out his ruby stone eye and give it to you know, a sick child, give it to the mother of the sick child to take care of him. And I mean, I read this story when I was a little girl, and I think at that time was very focused on this beautiful ruby stone and, you know, the cute bird and whatnot. But then, you know, as an adult, as an artist, reading the story again, because my niece and nephew was reading it and they're all crying. It's not a Disney story, so sad. And I was like, oh my God, you know, as an adult reading it, it's like, oh my God, this is really about the position of seeing. The prince was not able to see before, you know, being cloistered in, but now when he's high up, he's able to see better now. So the whole show is about navigating different kind of height, you know, so that you have different kind of viewpoint. So you can see, this is why I developed the sculptural language of putting anthropomorphic form on stand that is movable. So you can adjust it to any height. And then, you know, these feature, the spectator stand is another way to talk about the position of seeing or being seen, you know. So that is where play court come from, in a way, is a direct lineage to that. And see, you can, I even, you know, we're using production stand that can be, you know, used on uneven terrain. So I just put the book right there, as you know, you can see where it comes from. And in this show, there is a piece called Jade Tongue, which this is a piece that eventually went to Venice, and it's a combination of styrofoam and jade. And here is a detail. And then there's another piece called Optic Nerve, and it's a very abstract rendering of optic nerve. In, you know, I studied the anatomy of an eye, and there's this kind of nerve bundle of nerve to inside our eye, and that is and that's where this piece is inspired by. And then on the bleacher, there's a bunch of head that is made of wire and this sort of glass blob. And actually, the late illustrator and artist Miriam Watt's family donated her studio supply to CalArts, and then so I inherited a box of these broken glass. Actually, I think they're remnant from a glass studio in Murano, Italy, and so I see Miriam Watt, who, by the way, designed the very first cover of the Miss magazine in the 70s, and then it just really serendipity, you know. I inherited the glass blob from her, which is from Murano, and then in Venice, and then eventually this work went back to Venice. So the glass kind of went home in a way.
That's really cool.
It's really strange. And then in the same show, there is this is one of the favorite sculpture of all time. It's quite simple. It's called Income Inequality. So basically, I make this sculpture using a big piece of paper that has been primed with gesso, so it can give you some, body. And then I crumble them together, and then it's held together by real 24K gold bracelet that was given to me by my older sister. I have 3 other sisters and 1 brother, all live in Hong Kong. And when I, left Hong Kong in the late 80s, early 90s, my older sister gave me this jewelry as a kind of dowry, So, and I thought it's very evocative to use my dowry bracelet to hold together this, this paper, very fragile ball together.
As a first-generation Nigerian American, it conjures so many things for me. In my own life.
I can relate.
And I love this idea of a piece of delicate paper that's like gessoed over. I think that this work, I could see why it is a favorite, and I hadn't seen it before this, but it is a favorite of mine now that I see it. It's so interesting.
I mean, it just, I don't know. Anyway, we should move on, but it's so ridiculous. I love it. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about quantum Shirley before we completely run out of time. Oh my God, Joshua, where do I begin?
Yeah, where to begin with this work? Okay, how about I'll help you out a little bit. What are we seeing here? Because I know that this work is so much to unpack. After the first time that you mentioned it to me, I went out and explored it and researched it on my own, and I think I still have those tabs open on my computer, and I still have some questions in terms of that. So I'd love to start by you just telling me what we're seeing here, and then maybe using that.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. What you're seeing here is actually 2 different works. So in the front is called Quantum Shirley Series Superposition, and it's made of styrofoam. And I think you can tell the scale by the sort of cloud form on the right. Is sitting on top of a base of a swivel chair, and there's a playing card, and the playing card's about 4 feet tall, I think. And then on the other side, it's also made of styrofoam, but this time it is painted. I think that might have been one of the only painted styrofoam work that I ever done. I never paint over material usually. That is like a toy. It's actually a Happy Meal toy that's been blown up, I don't know, like 20 times.
Yeah.
And it represents a splash of an ocean. So on one side, the cloud actually represents Hong Kong, where I was born and raised. And then on the other side, represents Tahiti. That is, okay, that's the part that I can go into. And then the back on the wall is called Double Comfort of Soft Field Space. And you can see there is a detail. It is made of styrofoam and this sort of honeycomb board. And well, all right, I think I know how to talk about this. So I would say that, in the early years of my practice, I chose plastic or synthetic polymer for a really particular reason. And not only for the materiality, you can still see a lot of plastic here by 2009, but that some of it is not plastic, like the metal base and the paper and the wood, the cardboard thing. But I chose plastic not only for the materiality, but it's really important is about the concept of plasticity. And it's not just about malleability either, but the idea, when I talk about plasticity, I was much more interested in the idea of paradoxes, conflict, ambivalence. We have a love-hate relationship to plastic. Mm-hmm. It done wonderful thing for modern medicine, for hygiene. You can see it with COVID. with aviation and whatnot. But it's also, of course, you know, that this is like the one thing that we cannot get rid soon enough so that it does not further degrade our ecosystem.
Yeah.
And but you know, as I'm doing research on it, I also realized that plastic is not a substance. You know, a lot of people ask me, Shirley, you really into plastic as a material, aren't you? I was like, no, actually not. I'm much more into the concept of plasticity, because plastic is actually not a substance. It's a code, it's a formula, it's an arrangement, it's a syntax, it's a syntax. So chemists were able to coax carbon molecule to form irreversible carbon chain that are enormous. So what is synthetic about it is not the substance, because the substance is actually from nature, is petroleum-derived carbon molecule, right? Yeah. But it's the arrangement of this molecule that make it plastic. It's the syntax.
It's the human intervention, right?
Exactly. So, so by about 2007, a couple of years before that, I had moved away from using plastic exclusively and including other material. I'm also turning it to narrative, because I think that narrative is one thing that really embodies that plasticity that I just talked about. So depends on how you arrange things and juxtapose the sequence of events, you get different perception of reality. And so Quantum Shirley series is an ongoing series. It's still going on. I'm still making work for the series that allowed me to make work that weave together personal narrative, quantum theory, trade movement of colonial product like rubber and vanilla, and the Chinese diaspora. So, and in terms of the personal story, you know, we're running out of time. I'm gonna, you know, the short of the long story is that my mom is because of the Chinese diaspora, she's second generation Malaysian, Chinese Malaysian, born in Malaysia. And her cousin moved further away to look for, you know, job basically, and end up, you know, her family working in the vanilla bean plantation in Tahiti. And I remember, and then, you know, and her name is Simone, my second cousin. And Simone eventually become a toy import merchant. And she would go to Hong Kong to visit my mom and then also do her business. And then, you know, when I was born, I'm the fourth kid in the family, and she saw my mom, you know, struggling financially, and she offered to foster me as a baby. But it didn't happen. But I got to stay with my family. But you know, my early childhood is all full of this kind of like mystery story about this second cousin Simone, like. You know, I would have, you know, left Hong Kong and lived with her. And I always imagine like what it was like, you know, had I been adopted by Simone and grow up in Tahiti and speak French instead, you know, it's just a fluke.
That's so interesting.
You know,
and just to jump in really quickly, because I know we want to move it along, I wonder about this. I love this idea of applying this in the realm of quantum physics and like speculation and things like that, because I feel like so much of the immigrant experience is tied up in that experience. And as a kid, I had those sorts of things where like I would get something like a Happy Meal kit and a toy, and I would ask my parents like, this says this is made in China. Like, how does that work? And I think because I was first generation and because I was thinking about all of these what ifs, like what if I was in the same place as my cousins who lived in Nigeria or lived in another place? There's so much of that experience, especially here in America, that's tied up in this idea of speculation and tying it to the world of quantum physics and all of that. It's so interesting. And I'm glad that you're still making this work as well. It's one of the things that I wanted to say, but go ahead.
Yeah, indeed, that like quantum physics, you know, the thing is I think the reason why I decided, you know, back in 29 2009 to do the Quantum Shirley series, not only because of my personal story, because in the end, the story is not just about myself, but rather an intersection of larger historical events, you know, be they political ones or social one, economic one, and beyond. And I'm also particularly interested in how quantum, maybe, according to quantum physics, this Shirley did, one Shirley did grew up in Tahiti, right? So, and I just have no access to that Shirley. So the idea of how science is, the quantum physics validate alternate realities is just fascinating to me. How it kind of provide a kind of validation of that reality.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm seeing so much how all the things you're thinking about are connecting. Because I wonder, and it kind of looks like from this work as I'm viewing it, this can be in different configurations. If I'm wrong, like you can move this around, or is it always shown in this manner?
It could. I think the way, I'm just making more work to address, you see it, I should move along. But I just want to say one last thing about quantum physics. Like the reason why I use the playing card is the scientists usually, when they explain quantum physics, they will use the idea of a card. If it fall, it's actually fall on both sides. It's called a collapse of the wave function, which basically means that thing exists in multiple states, but then collapse into one state when observed. That's why you're not able to see the other side. But this slide does not show you on the other side is actually a heart 8. It's a diamond 8. I didn't have a detail of that. So to answer your question, instead of moving things around, actually, there are more work that's made under the series. Like, for example, this piece is called Flotsam and Webs. And then you can see it's made of expanded foam that in the process, when the foam expanding, I put the sort of laser cut wood veneer over it so that the foam kind of popped up through the cutout. And it laid out a map of the quantum Shirley story that I just explained to you with the Chinese diaspora. And so that's, and then some of the work that made on the quantum Shirley series is not exactly direct related to my personal family history, but more to the concept of translation, going from one state to another. For example, this is called Squaring the Circle in 2010. Is about, an ancient mathematical riddle of how mathematicians trying to square a circle to translate the circle into a square and vice versa, and they got pi 3.14. So you can never really replace or translate something fully. So that was like, so under the quantum Shirley series, I'm trying to address, different notion of interconnection, network, translation, displacement, and, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how. And then also, I think, did you see this piece at the Armory or?
I did. Yeah, during this time, I was studying letterpress at the Armory during this time. Just very much kind of dipping my toe into the art world and thinking about all the various different things that entails. And I did get to see this piece and the larger show that it was a part of. Yeah.
Right. So besides sculpture, I also did a lecture. I consider this a lecture performance under the Quantum Shirley series. So, and in the, I don't have a slide of it, but in this performance, I actually show a video that is purportedly made by the other Shirley from Tahiti. And I'm also using this kind of interesting shaped chalkboard that is an artwork by former CalArts student, Sam Surmaker, actually, he's sitting right there. And so that's another form of collaboration. And then we have I'm going to skip over this piece because we kind of run out of time. So you can see there is, I'm making work that sort of address, like, for example, this is about different form of connection, the sort of network. And I'm going to jump to the Hong Kong part now, shall we?
Yeah, yeah.
So when it's after the Venice Biennale, the piece, because it's hosted by Hong Kong, so they usually do a return or renew show, and then in a way it's a kind of homecoming show for Hong Kong. But since I don't live there anymore, so it's a little bit strange to talk about homecoming. So this show was installed at the M+ Pavilion, because the organizing unit from Hong Kong is the M+ Museum, and you can see in this iteration is actually very different. There are elements that is more specific, because I wanted to address the architecture of the space once, again, for example. And so I make this section to, I make the spindle to climb the ceilings and kind of go around the duct and vent, so to speak. And here's another view of the installation, the sort of hug around that pillar, and this is the details of how it kind of go up the ceiling. And this part actually is very planned, because there's no way to improvise on the ceiling, and we need to measure it and find the correct shape to go around those duct. But I also like the sort of juxtaposition of some area that's totally planned and some areas like totally improvised. So yeah, that is a negotiated differences. Do you think we have time to show maybe just 2 minutes of the process of the remote installation?
Yeah, I think that would be really important. And I was going to just lead up to that, I was going to say, I love that you revised how this was shown. And I think we should discuss a little bit briefly before you jump into the video, how that all happened, because it happened in the past year. And this was on view most of last year, correct?
Yes. Yeah, okay, yes, that's right. So we planned for the show, actually, I don't even remember now. I think I don't even remember, because it's the opening day shipped so many times. I think it was supposed to open in May, if I remember correctly. And of course, COVID hit in Asia in January and in America in March. So we postponed the show to July, and and I was supposed to go to Hong Kong to install, of course, using the help of the install team. But we were on holding pattern since the beginning of 2020 because of COVID. So we kind of waited and see, and then, when it just get worse and worse, in US and all. Actually, Hong Kong got better. I think they opened a little bit. Yeah. But then they went back to the second wave and third wave. Anyway, so we're in holding pattern, and so I think sometime in probably in I can't even remember, February or March, we decided this is not gonna, no one will be able to travel, but we want the show to go on. And so indeed, the shipment of the work was returned. It went to Hong Kong from Italy, and the work is already there. But me and the curator Christina Lee won't be able to travel to Hong Kong, and so we had many discussion, and we will aim to do it remotely, and which is actually, if the work is totally configured, pre-planned, it wouldn't be a problem for a museum like the M+. They're totally capable of installing something according to instruction. But the nature of this piece is there's so much improvisation going on. So they were a little hesitant in, like, how do we do this? Because, I think as preparator, they really want to respect the work, and I don't know how much they will allow themselves to improvise. So I have to go through a lot of training session, discussion, a lot of Zoom.
I was thinking about that when I asked her to do this. I was like, she may be tired of Zoom as a professor and as a person that installed a major exhibition in Hong Kong remotely. And I think the video clip that we're going to show.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's jump into it.
Seeing you in the other cameras.
Oh gosh, yeah, I don't know which angle they can just spy on us.
They see all angles.
I know, it's like God's eyes. Kind of open towards our left when you are facing.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
This connector should be right above this angle, so it should come up to here. Can you see the green line? Yeah, Maggie has another option. She has another view.
But you can see a different angle. This is the front. This is blocking.
5 steps.
It looks good.
The table is looking great.
Yay! I'm glad you think
It's
so.
like it's
Yeah,
got
I think so.
such a presence, you know? You walk in, you're like, oh my God. It's really great.
Yeah.
Mm.
Want to talk before the 7:30 or the next day? You just let me know. That's great. Okay. And Jin, don't stay up too late, please.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
All right, good night. Bye.
Good night. We're catching up with what we originally wanted to do. Today, things went really quick. I mean, yesterday with the cube, it was understandably much more complicated and exhausting, I guess, for all parties involved to really levitate this cube on the side, which at the end worked out. Yeah. Do something there instead.
I see.
It's just looking amazing. This is our new world, no? I mean, the installation so far is fascinating. And the use of space, superb. I'm just thrilled. Really thrilled.
I'm so glad to hear.
Yeah.
It's completely different than Venice.
Of
It's
course.
So different. Yeah.
Yeah. But you know,
Venice is very low. This is just really, I'm really accentuating the architecture of that space. Last look at the architecture of the space before we say goodbye.
That's right. It is true.
either 係 horizontal 咁樣斜過嚟呢一邊啦，或者係 lift up 少少嘅。 因為我哋睇過其他嘅柱咧，都係貼近個柱，我哋想呢度係 spread 得大少少，因為嗰邊我哋就會一個伸延啦，跟住而家後邊即係 Maggie 呢邊又會有個伸延啦。咁所以我係諗緊呢成條柱嘅位置都係會疏啲啊。
好啊，咁跟住咧，你可以砌咗之後咧，其實可以將呢樣嘢咧轉唔同角度嚟睇。
So basically, there are like 4 legs now.
So I think you get the idea. So the very last bit is interesting because the two preparators or the installation team, they're actually giving me their improvisation idea. So I didn't do that session. They did it, but then we do a lot of back and forth and kind of help them out. And it's a little bit triggering because there was so much work.
I was gonna ask. That was gonna be my first question. Looking at this, it's so exciting and it's such a fun thing. It's like so many people come into art and practice and they ask me questions about how things are done and how the art gets hung. And I feel like this is a really great example to show people of what happens, even though it's so far outside of the norm, you being, on a Zoom call and doing all of this. But I think it's amazing to see because for one, the multi-languages that are being used and everything that's happening together to make it work. You know what I mean? Which, it's a beautiful thing to see, but it's also such a daunting task to have to put on. And also your studio assistant, who's the person I'm familiar with his art and his practice outside of this conversation as well. So it's really interesting to see as an artist, how much you give up, how much you're willing to engage with something like this. Because I know artists that are at the level that you are that won't take this sort of thing, where they're just like, I don't want to deal with that. I'm not going to install remotely or anything like that. And then I think one thing I will add for the team that's working on this, for the preparators, for the installation team, everyone, this is such a great experience for them to be a part of. I do so much stuff like this in my job working with artists, and I'm learning things all the time, but never do people give up the opportunity for them to say, we need to improvise and you tell me how you might want this to look in your space and things like that. I think you didn't perceive that this was going to happen, I imagine, but that's such a beautiful part of this whole idea of stakeholders and the various things that come together. I think that that's an unexpected element of this presentation. While I'm sure it was insane for you to deal with, it's great.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the title of this installation, Negotiate Difference, has become a running joke, trust me. We constantly have to negotiate, the not only the different languages, speaking between the Chinese and the English, but also time difference. I'm in LA, the curator, Christina Lee, in Amsterdam, Europe time, and then the Hong Kong time. And then at one point we were involving someone in New York. It was just really crazy. I was up at wee hours, in the middle of the night, just doing this. And then, but then I would say that is actually what makes this work and makes sense is because there is actually a built-in unplanned the non-predetermined nature of the installation. I mean, improvisation is built in the work. So the difference is that was I was gonna go there and then sort of be the leader or the the orchestrate, the what do you call the conductor. Thank you. I was gonna be a little bit of the conductor of the improvisation. But in this situation, I was not able to be there. But still, because the improvisation is built in the work, it's not like I'm changing the work or the installation is already there. So it's actually made it possible to do remote installation because I built in the improvisation into the process to start with. So it didn't actually take that much struggle to make the decision to do it remotely because I'll be like, well, it's meant to be improvised anyway, so you don't really need me there. I can give you guidelines and stuff. So it's actually work. It was just more about the kind of day-to-day pragmatic thing that is really exhausting,
Yeah.
And for example, this, that this image I'm showing you, you know, I'm not very good in doing 3D modeling on the computer. So there was time when I need to tell them that it will, it might look better if you tweak the angle of a certain element. So I was not able to show, like, it takes so long to describe like a little tiny movement, you know, through this platform, you know, this online platform. I think that is how I find out the difference between analog and digital, because certain thing, if you are in there, you know, in the space with your own body, it only takes 2 seconds to do it. But you know, to communicate and have someone do it, it will take like 15 minutes to do what you could have done exactly.
Right, to render it on a computer, to do AutoCAD, all of those things are so time consuming.
Yeah, I actually not very good at it. It will take me too long to even use AutoCAD, so I end up cutting pieces of paper sculpture and then held it with a tweezer in front of a photograph that I took from their live camera, and then show them, you know, give them video tutorial. You can like turn it this way and see how it looks. It was, I mean, this part is almost like an artwork itself, you know what I mean?
It really is. The documentation of the process is just as much. And I feel like that's definitely, like, that's not always something that every artist, we don't need to see that for every artist in the way that they work. But I think for your work, it's so interesting, especially in terms of, you know, the different hands and things that come into making it, which is a thing to think about when you think about a sculptor and people that work in the mediums that you work in. But I think, you know, the documentation, that's why I love this video. And I had a chance to see this video before I actually met you and I spoke to you. And I was so excited about it because, you know, I work so closely and I could see myself having to do something like this. But then also this idea of the collectivity, all the people coming together. It's just really great.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. The video is available on YouTube if you search, you know, the M+ channel. It will be in there. It's Agency in Practice, and it's a great title. I just want to show you that, you know, even for Negotiate Difference, when it went to Hong Kong, it's expanded. We added more spindle, and then we added something that is more site-specific or site-responsive, I should say. That, for example, you know, because it was in Hong Kong and there's such a eating of food culture there, you know, I thought, you know, we need a table, and then we need, you know, to adjust the idea of how, you know, the community come together really on a, you know, around a, you know, table and eating and sharing food. So we carved soy sauce bottle and teacups, and we put it on top of this sort of abstract table form. And then also want to show this barricade, you know, because like by 2020, you know, the Hong Kong has already been transformed in the recent protest movement. And if you look at the sort of everyday street scene, you know, there's kind of like barricade being mingled, and, you know, so I wanted to include that as well.
Yeah, I think the timely nature of so much of the work that you do is so important. I remember hearing and watching the student uprisings that were happening in Hong Kong before COVID was a thing here. And it felt like those two things, while they weren't explicitly like tied together, in my mind, I'm always going to look back at those times and think about it as well. So I love that you put those elements into this work. And I think in the work that you're doing, as it continues to grow, it pulling elements from the current events as well is something that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, you know, it is, again, it adhere to the logic of the work, you know, just quite like the way that I included Nancy Pelosi gavel and the North Korean, I mean, I should say unified Korean team's hockey stick. So that, you know, when what's going on in Hong Kong, I think that is part of Negotiate Difference to include those scenes as well. And there's also, you know, they use, what do you call those things? Traffic cone to extinguish the tear gas. So we also included a traffic cone in the piece. And then the bleacher in this in the Hong Kong iteration has become deconstructed because Hong Kong is going through so much upheaval. So I wanted play court no longer is like a scene that is ready to be played, but it's sort of like now is in this sort of like deconstructed zone, you know, that you don't quite know whether is the game has already over, that people are putting away equipment, or the game is about to begin, that we're getting ready for it. So I like for it to have this sort of ambivalence state. And there is also the amateur radio component in the Hong Kong part. Actually, we added even more antenna to address the outdoor space. And here's the deconstructed look of play court in Hong Kong. And then you can see through the window, there is multiple antenna outside. Yeah, actually there is, yeah. So, and then the shuttle pod come back. And I added new sculpture for play court as well. That's sort of the safety head piece. And this is called zip tie head, and made of bundle up with zip tie. You know, the stronger it is if you interconnect, almost like a Venn diagram for zip tie to tie together. And, you know, zip tie is another thing you see in the street scene of Hong Kong. And then this piece is called Emotion Not Solution. Actually, is it was already in the Venice iteration, and I can show you a detail of it. And it's made of the leftover, you know, the failed prints from negotiated differences. That's right. A lot of the 3D printing, you know, have error beyond usability. There's no, you know, I was not able to use it to connect. So I kind of melded them together to form this mask. And then it's you know, installed on top of another radio antenna, but this one is not functional. It's called Emotion Not Solution. I just want to say that it kind of also addressed the similar negotiated difference concept, because I believe two distinct things, for example, like oil and vinegar, can come together holding each other in suspension as in an emotion, like a salad dressing, without having to be dissolved into one solution. That's a really important concept as well. There's a way to connect across differences, yet maintaining agency for each individual entity without rendering everything into uniformity. So that is the thing, the message.
Such a great concept for people to think about during this time. You know, it's
yeah. I think that is, we get to the end of the slideshow, Joshua.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And I feel like that's a really great place to really end it in terms of what you're talking about. It's like a thesis to your whole practice in a sense. Even looking back to, you know, those Quantum Shirley works and those works that are referential to your history and your personal experience in some way or another, it pulls from so many elements and it pulls from so many things. So first of all, thank you for sharing so much.
You're so welcome.
About your practice and about your work. I'm really excited to see like where you take these ideas in the future. I think, you know, getting to the level of presenting as the first woman representing Hong Kong at the Venice Biennale, it really is only the beginning of what you can start to do and how you can start to apply these concepts. That's why I really loved everything that you showed from the M+ version of the work. It's just all really exciting to me. So thank you again, you know, for sharing so much about your practice and about everything. Really looking forward to seeing more.
You're so welcome. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, I don't know. I think I just want to quickly add this point that, you know, the remote installation and then going through COVID is a real challenge, but also you know, kind of back to the stakeholder theory, you know, it's not necessarily conflict, but it could be, you know, opportunity to create new value. So in this sort of like the world greatest reset, you know, I'm also thinking towards the future, and how, even though I was not able to go to Hong Kong and install it, you know, I think the plus side is, you know, we save some greenhouse gas emission by not traveling, you know, so I think that's very positive. So moving, you know, in the future, I think you know, the next challenge is to think about the idea of sustainability. So that will be something that I will carry on the concept of stakeholder and move towards in that direction.
Yeah, and I think, you know, so many things that encompasses, right? Like, I love that you mentioned this idea of travel and things of that nature. I think about that a ton, inviting artists to do things, and, you know, do we want to put people on a plane and have them come out to Los Angeles to do something that only touches a small amount of people, or things of that nature. And I think you've set a really great system for yourself as an artist to think about that in your studio practice as you rehash old elements and reuse them in a way that is actually, you know, it services the ideas that you're trying to get across as well. But then in your studio practice, you know, the materials that you use and creating new work. We talked about that briefly in the conversations that we were having, that you're mentioning, you know, in terms of making new work. Do you want to acquire new materials or new things, or use what's already there? I think that that's a really important thing for people to think of, and think about this idea of the stake that we all hold in our environment, and, you know, the various careers and things that we have. So I really appreciate you adding that towards the end of this talk, because it is such an important thing to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there is, yeah, I think, you know, I think on many different level, yeah, you know, I get, some people ask me, what is the new normal? I don't know. I don't have an answer to it, but I know this much: the old normal, so to speak, is not very sustainable, both in terms of, you know, the environment, the use of material, the consumerist attitude, the sort of like disposable culture, and, you know, air travel, I mean, you name it, you know, the use of material, and also the pacing, you know, timing. You know, we churn out so many exhibitions in such small amount of time these days, to, you know, for all the art fairs and buying and so forth. So it's a good time to slow down a bit and think about if that is the kind of pacing we all want as artists. Yeah, so a lot to think about.
Yeah, and I think also it's one of those things that even if we're all thinking about it on our own, it comes to a level of where you need to come together. You need to have various different perspectives and all of those things. Just to touch on, you know, your ideas of collectivity and all of that stuff and how important it is. Because I'm thinking about these things so much, sustainability and things like that. And it really only starts to become something that's concrete to me until I start to talk to people like yourself. When I talk to artists and I talk to people and they're thinking about the various different ways that they're applying it in their work, both personally and professionally, I think it's the thing that we all need, right? Is to come together. And I'll just want to say thank you again for making work that advocates for that sort of thing, that advocates for people to come together and think about these ideas, not only through their own lens, right? Think about it through other people's lenses and things like that. So thanks again.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for creating the space for us to have this conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.